They say history is written by the victors. But in Africa, some cities write their own history, silently, boldly, and defiantly. Asmara, the capital of Eritrea, doesn't scream for attention like Cairo or Lagos. It doesn't market its skyline or boast its GDP. But look closer, and you'll find something far more powerful, an African city that didn't just survive colonialism. It stared it down, reshaped it, and walked away with its soul intact. This is the untold story of how Asmara rejected colonialism, and won. In a continent scarred by European exploitation, where most capitals bear the architectural scars of colonizers, Asmara stands as a paradox. Built during Italy's imperial adventure in East Africa, it should have become just another outpost of European dominance. But instead, it absorbed the architecture and ejected the arrogance. The streets? Lined with futurist, rationalist, and Art Deco buildings that could rival Rome or Milan. But the spirit? Unmistakably Eritrean. To understand Asmara, you have to travel back to the 1880s, when the scramble for Africa was in full swing. While the British, French, and Belgians carved up the continent like a feast, the Italians arrived late, and desperate to claim their slice. Eritrea, with its Red Sea coastline, strategic location, and highland climate, became their gateway. In 1890, Italy officially declared Eritrea its colony. But unlike other colonial powers that focused on extraction, Italy poured money into infrastructure, roads, railways, and especially, architecture. Their dream? To create a Little Rome in Africa. Asmara became the blank canvas for this fantasy. But here's where it gets interesting. The Italians didn't just build, they overbuilt. By the 1930s, Mussolini's fascist regime used Asmara to showcase its power. Over 400 buildings were constructed in under a decade, banks, cinemas, churches, and government offices, all in radical European styles that had no parallel on the continent. It was futuristic, ambitious, and at first glance, colonial. But behind the concrete and symmetry was something the Italians didn't expect: resistance in silence. You see, while most African cities were reshaped to suit European functions, Asmara retained its soul. The city wasn't built on erasure. It was layered, like sediment, Italian design atop Eritrean culture. Locals worked as craftsmen, masons, and builders. They memorized techniques. They adapted blueprints. And as the decades passed, they turned foreign designs into local pride. When World War II erupted, the Italian dream in Africa crumbled. Britain took control of Eritrea in 1941, and later handed it to Ethiopia under a UN mandate. For many Eritreans, this was betrayal, not liberation. The Ethiopian regime sought to erase Eritrean identity, dissolve its institutions, and dismantle its autonomy. But Asmara had learned from its past. It had preserved its identity through architecture. And now, it preserved its defiance through silence, protest, and eventually, war. The Eritrean War of Independence, which lasted from 1961 to 1991, became one of the longest liberation struggles in African history. And through it all, Asmara stood firm, not just as a capital, but as a symbol. While bombs dropped and soldiers marched, its streets remained intact. Not by luck, but by strategy. The Eritrean People's Liberation Front made a conscious decision not to destroy their capital. They knew Asmara was more than bricks and mortar. It was a living archive of struggle, survival, and sovereignty. When Eritrea finally gained independence in 1993, something extraordinary happened. While other African nations rushed to modernize, bulldozing colonial relics and importing foreign skyscrapers, Asmara stood still. It didn't erase its past. It redefined it. The city that had once been a playground for fascist architecture now became a museum of resistance. The Fiat Tagliero building, shaped like an airplane, once symbolized Mussolini's imperial ambition. Now, it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, a symbol of Eritrea's unique ability to reclaim and repurpose. The Cinema Impero, a 1930s Art Deco masterpiece, still shows films, not as a colonial echo, but as a community hub. There are no McDonald's or glass towers here. No frantic race to copy Dubai or Singapore. Asmara's modernization is subtle, purposeful. It invests in healthcare, education, and clean streets, not in flashing lights. But let's be clear, Asmara isn't frozen in time. It evolves, but on its own terms. This is what makes it revolutionary. In a world obsessed with erasing the past or monetizing it, Asmara preserves it with dignity. Its rejection of colonialism isn't just historical, it's ongoing. The city refuses to let foreign donors, NGOs, or economic giants dictate its development. Critics call it isolation. Locals call it sovereignty. There's a difference. When you walk through Asmara today, you don't feel overwhelmed. You feel balanced. The city breathes. Streets are walkable. Traffic is calm. Architecture doesn't scream, it converses. And underneath it all is a quiet confidence that's rare in today's globalized chaos. Asmara is what happens when a city chooses identity over imitation. It's not trying to impress the West. It's not chasing trends. It's telling its own story, in silence, in symmetry, in stone. And that's why you've probably never heard it. Because silence doesn't trend. But in a continent still wrestling with the ghosts of colonialism. Dusk wide shot of Asmara glowing in soft evening light. Camera pulled back to show it as a beacon on a hill. Eritrean flag gently waving. The city appears timeless and symbolic. The city that was built by colonizers, but never colonized. The city that transformed European arrogance into African pride. The city that rejected colonialism, and won. Not with weapons. Not with noise. But with dignity. And design. If this story moved you, don't let it stay buried. Like this video to help rewrite the narrative of Africa. Comment below, what surprised you most about Asmara? Subscribe to Continent Pulse for more untold stories of African resistance, identity, and excellence. Share this story, because silence is no longer strength. Visibility is. This is not just a story. It's a quiet revolution. And you are now part of it.